This episode of the CMO Suite is brought to you by Uconnect. Uconnect provides digital solutions and teams to brand CMOs, VPs, and marketers looking for true transparency in the biddable media space. From paid social and PPC to complex platforms like The Trade Desk, brands from across the world have connected to Uconnect. Visit them today at uconnect.com. And No Kid Hungry. We're proud to promote No Kid Hungry and their many initiatives to help kids in need of meals. Visit them at nokidhungry.org. This episode of the CMO Suite is also brought to you by Winmo. Winmo is the most comprehensive and widely used advertising database, providing an unfair advantage to media and marketing professionals nationwide. Winmo tracks every national advertiser, their agency relationships, and key executives within each organization. Get instant media spend, competitor tracking, and industry trend analysis in one easy-to-use application that integrates with all major CRM platforms. CMO Suite listeners receive complimentary trials of Winmo just by visiting winmo.com/CMO Suite. Finally, the CMO Suite is presented by the CMOcouncil.org as their official marketers podcast. The Chief Marketing Officer Council is the only global network of executives specifically dedicated to high-level knowledge exchange, thought leadership, and personal relationship building among senior corporate marketing leaders and brand decision makers. The CMO Council's 15,000 plus members control more than $550 billion in aggregated annual marketing expenditures and run complex distributed marketing and sales operations worldwide. For more information on membership, visit thecmocouncil.org. Let's start the show.
You're in the CMO Suite, the podcast for marketers who want to be in the know, presented by Connectivity Holdings.
You are listening to the CMO Suite presented by Connectivity Holdings. This is your host, Sean Halter. I am incredibly excited to have with us as our guest today, James Orsini. James is the president at the Sasha Group. I am very familiar with him through a relationship that we have with the studio that we are in, which is the Thumbstopper Studio. A good buddy of mine, Matt Brown, I guess he's a client of yours to some extent. And
Correct.
You guys continue to help him along the way of just understanding what marketing is out there in the landscape. And I was excited to have you on really to talk more about what it is that you guys are doing and how you're helping marketers in general. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Sean. Thanks so much for having me. And yes, Matt is a client of the Sasha Group in a very special program that we have, a select group called the Vayner Mentors program.
So talk a little bit. First of all, I'm assuming are you in New York now or where are you living during this time?
I'm in quarantine in my home in Livingston, New Jersey. But I kind of wish I was in Florida with you.
Yeah, listen, there are days I miss the city terribly, but we'll take it from here. So spending some time in Jersey, is that where you grew up or where did you grow up, James, if you don't mind me asking?
I was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey. So son of a plumber, first generation college, went to Seton Hall University.
So your dad was a plumber?
Yeah, man, my grandfather's business first, then my father's business, and then my brother as well.
So did he stay in the industry? Is he still a plumber today, your brother?
Yeah, my brother has expanded the business to be much beyond plumbing and got into building as well. So he has a building license as well as a plumbing license here in the States. So he's gone on to do very well for himself.
So if anything goes wrong, at least you've got somebody you can call. Does he charge you a regular rate or does he at least give you a discount?
No. He's been good with us, and in fact, the house that I'm in, he's built. So
oh, that's cool.
Got a lot to be thankful for.
You call him when a crack comes up or something, or like, gosh, this building.
I do. I'm just not handy in any way, shape, or form. And only one summer working with my dad, when
that was enough.
He said, "Okay, you're going to go to school," and he went to my brother. "You're going to take over the business." And
wow.
And that was it. It was, one summer spent.
That's all it took for everybody to know you were definitely going to be a marketer.
Exactly. So I was always much better with a pencil or pen in my hand than a wrench.
So you ended up going to Seton Hall for school, correct?
Yeah. I was actually, I thought I was going to go to Lehigh, and I just couldn't live in the dorm. So I called my dad up, and I'm like, "Look, this is not working out." And he's like, "Well, look, why don't you come back to Seton Hall? You got a scholarship to go there, and I'll buy you a new Trans Am." So it didn't take much.
Trans Am.
Take those T-tops off and drive through the front gate.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you finished school, and then did you go into finances first, or how did you make your way up into marketing?
Yeah, I was really fortunate in that I share an entrepreneurial spirit with Matt. In that I had my own car cleaning business in college.
Okay.
And I remember I majored in accounting, and I was being interviewed in my junior year by what was then sort of big eight accounting firms. And I was being interviewed by a company called, which is now KPMG, was KMG at the time. And I had a beeper go off during the interview. Remember, you used to wear the beepers on your hip.
Oh yeah.
And I said, listen, I have to go. I said, I got a doctor's car outside. I have to bring it back. And I'll never forget, the guy's name was Larry Jansen. He said, James, I love that entrepreneurial spirit. You got a job. Go ahead, go bring that car back.
Okay.
So I had an internship in my junior year. I was offered full-time position before I graduated. So I kind of knew exactly where I was going. I spent a couple of years in public accounting at KPMG. I was an auditor, which is where I first saw a marketing client. It was a company called Siegel and Gale, which was owned by Saatchi and Saatchi at the time, a big branding company. And I remember saying to myself, I could see myself here someday. Like, this is a pretty cool environment, you know?
Because it was sexy and it was different. It was interesting. It wasn't just numbers. There was some cool elements to it.
Yep. Yeah, there I was in a jacket and tie crunching numbers, and there they were casual, summer Fridays where they got off. They were working on really cool branding initiatives like the bull from Merrill Lynch. I remember seeing it before it ever saw the light of day.
Yeah.
And it was a collaborative environment. And it was on the front end of making. See, that was the important point. As an auditor, I was on the back end reviewing what somebody else had already done. And I knew I wanted to get closer to the front end of actually being the creator.
You just said the front end of making. I don't know that I've heard it kind of said quite like that, but it's very true. You're at the front end of seeing something actually happen. And when you do that in New York City, I've traveled all over. I know you've traveled all over the world. There is nothing like seeing a campaign unveiled of any sort, like in New York City. Nothing like it.
Absolutely. I mean, especially if you get to see that in Times Square on the electric billboards and really bring it to life. So I did what a lot of guys did in the 80s. KMG merged with Pete Morrick. I resigned on the day of the merger, and I went to work for Goldman Sachs. I went to Wall Street. I knew I knew it wasn't for me. It just wasn't in my DNA. But I stood there a couple of years, and I got a call from a guy who I worked with at KPMG, and he said, the Saatchi brothers just bought a single public relations firm in New York. They want to build a worldwide company. And if you leave Goldman Sachs, someday you'll be the CFO of that company.
So did you know the Saatchi brothers? Did you actually meet them as part of your time at Saatchi or Interbrand?
I did after being employed there. Yeah, Charles and Maurice. I remember walking into a conference room, and they said, go in there and meet Maurice. I go into this conference room, there's this guy with his feet up on the table, and and I walk out, and they said, what's the matter? I said, no, there's some guy in there. He looks.
And they're like, that's him.
I go, he looks like a drug lord, and they're like, wait, that? He goes, no, that's him. That's Saatchi. You got to go back in.
That's so crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, you have your perceptions of people, and then when you see them, it's like totally different.
I think sometimes you end up, certainly in the days pre-social media, where maybe you didn't see somebody as much, or you didn't have as much access to actually knowing them. We didn't have LinkedIn back then. You didn't have the ability to do that. I remember when we did our first campaign for the Metropolis brothers, when they bought Pabst, we had to fly out to Los Angeles, and we met one of them, walked by me in the hall. I never would have thought, this is a multi-millionaire. They might have even been billionaires or something crazy at the time. And those guys are still kind of crazy. I think one of them ended up buying the Playboy Mansion or something, but I don't know, maybe again, sometimes it takes that uniqueness to really be at the forefront of some of these things. And certainly Saatchi at the time, and still, I feel like today, to some extent, they were definitely at the forefront of being as cutting edge as you could, maybe, back in the early 2000s.
Yeah. When I went there, which was, 1989, I think 88, 89, when I first got there. I worked there twice in my career. So in the late 80s, I worked for a public relations subsidiary that they started up, and within 5 years, we had built the fifth largest public relations firm in the world. It's now part of the MS&L Group, which is owned by Publicis. But Saatchi was the largest advertising agency in the world at that time. And then years later, they had gotten purchased by Publicis, And I said, you know what, I'm going to have a new boss anyway. Let me pick my boss rather than be told who my boss is. And then I went to work for Interbrand, another, at that time, world's largest branding company, owned by Omnicom. I spent 4 years there as their global CFO and 2 years as their North American chief operating officer.
And let me hit on that for just a second before you jump from there, though, James, because again, I think one of the interesting things that you brought to the table, one of the things I feel like since I started this podcast several years ago that I've learned along the way is that understanding the element of finance when it comes to marketing has become so ridiculously imperative. If you don't understand the numbers, you may be a great wizard when it comes to brand. You might be really smart when it comes to how people engage with social media. But if you don't understand the numbers behind how this works, you will only elevate yourself so high. I think it was Jackson Gianagam who maybe, had that conversation with me or again, several other people in the past. It does feel like that financial element is a critical element that maybe sometimes isn't necessarily either put in place when you're in school and thinking about marketing, or it's maybe not emphasized as much as you build yourself up. Do you feel like I'm on point with that, or am I
Yeah.
old school?
So remember, let's talk about old school, because today
Sure.
is much more commonplace in the world of analytics and measurement, right? So we have a lot of numbers dudes in media and what have you. In my day, it was unusual, right? So I was a global CFO overseeing 31 offices in 26 countries before I was 30. And then did it again at Interbrand, right, for that MS&L Group company, and then did it again at Interbrand, and then decided that I was done with being a finance guy. And
Yeah.
like, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm going to resign and figure something out. And they're like, look, don't resign. We'll create something for you. So they created the North American Chief Operating Officer position for me. And they're like, look, we have a North American president. We don't have a CEO. You partner up with this guy. You'll handle the operations side. He'll handle the external client side. Together, you'll operate as if you're the office of the CEO. So that's how it really started.
So obviously, to dovetail off that, to your point, today you need to know numbers. You just can't. You don't necessarily need to know maybe perhaps all of the financial aspects or elements, or you don't have to come through that. But if you don't understand numbers, if you aren't living in the space of numbers, you're probably not going to make it. And maybe now more so than ever, with whatever this becomes over the next year or two, which is changing extremely quickly, you're probably not going to make it. And so how do you do that if you're in your 30s, James? How do you figure that out in your 30s? How do you leap back into place to try to learn that skill set if you're in your 30s or 40s, or heaven help, you're in your 50s and still trying to figure it out?
You can't be afraid to learn, right? With all this virtual learning now that the entire globe is leaning into. Okay, you realize my wife, who's an alumni of NYU, they started offering courses for their alumni, and they're like, you know what, we're doing all these virtual sessions anyway. You, as an alumni, could sit in, and she's sitting in on a finance course. She's in her 50s, so.
Right now.
Yeah. So that's really how you begin to do it. You need a working knowledge of finance. You don't need to be me, a New York State certified CPA, right? But you do need a working knowledge. In fact, I'm encouraging my daughter's boyfriend now, who's at Lehigh and dabbling in accounting, and I'm like, listen, you can major in accounting and don't have to be an accountant. Okay. But just having that background in your major will allow you to understand so many aspects of it.
And it's a little different. Again, maybe if you're an entrepreneur, we have investments in a handful of different companies, much smaller than Saatchi, but the accounting aspect is the one that always drives me the craziest. It's the one where I'm always racking my head because I'm just not good at it. But to your point, you have to know it. You have to understand it. If you can't, when the proverbial shit really hits the fan, and that's happening right now to a lot of companies, you're not going to know how to get through it. You're not going to know where do you trim the fat? How do you make these adjustments, and how do you pivot with purpose as opposed to just panic, which obviously you're seeing out there.
I was listening to a podcast earlier today from a company called Pixel 506, another mentor client. And he made the comment, and I actually wrote it down: behind every successful entrepreneur is an operational rock star. So, I mean, and to really understand the operations, you got to at least have a finger on the pulse of the finance, and at least not be shy of it or bashful of it, but rather have a working understanding.
You don't know your way around a P&L.
Yeah,
It'd be
it's
hard to
allowed
grow
me
a
to
company.
even be the CEO of a publicly traded company, which I was for the better part of 3.5 years. So,
Yeah.
I know I'm very comfortable, and now I'm client facing uh, you know, use my operational tendencies to drive profitability into this new company that Gary created.
Talk to us a little bit about your time there. So obviously, again, you've moved into some different places. You ended up at Vayner at some point in the 2015 ish, give or take. How did you meet him? How did you decide that that was where you wanted to go next? Because again, it's not that long ago. It's only 5 years ago, but 5 years ago, there were plenty of people out there that were saying, who is this guy to tell us how we need to be handling our business? And they
Yeah,
just got caught flat footed.
yeah. So just to finish the weaving of the thread, so
Please.
Interbrand to go back to Saatchi and Saatchi, but this time as the operational lead of their general market advertising, not a subsidiary. I While there, I went to a Seton Hall University basketball game and sat next to Gary Vaynerchuk's younger brother, AJ Vaynerchuk. And we just got to talking, and he was like, "Yeah, me and my brother started this small social media company. There's four of us." And I said, "Look, I'm chief operating officer of Saatchi. If you want to come down and see what it's like when you get bigger."
Yeah.
And
Show
he
you
took
how it works.
me on it. And then I always kind of mentored him over the course of multiple years. Um, After Saatchi, I became the CEO of a company called Cedo Mobile, trades on the NASDAQ for mobile media. Um, and then I picked up the phone to call AJ to just say, "Hey, man, I'm getting back into bigger advertising. I'll see you again in New York City. I'm either going to take a job at Publicis or one of their subsidiaries."
Somewhere.
You
Yep.
know? So he's like, "Hey, James, did you ever meet my brother Gary?" And I said, "No." He said, "Did you ever hear of my brother Gary?" I said, "Not really." He said, "Well, you should come in and meet him." And I did. We spent like 15 minutes together, and I got a call from AJ. He said, "Look, he really likes you. Wants to have dinner with you." So I had dinner with him, and he said, "James, I want to build a $500 million independent, integrated international communications company. Can you help me do it?" And I said, "Yeah, I actually think I can."
It's funny that he called it that. So let me unpack that for just a second before you dig into your time there. But two things jumped out at me there, James. One again is this situation where you just happen to be sitting next to somebody. We hear those stories sometimes. Oh, I was on a plane. I happened to upgrade to first class. I end up sitting next to, the CMO for this or that. Those moments happen, I think, to all of us. But if you don't take the opportunity to just say hello, if you don't take a moment to say, what do you do? And form a relationship at some point that doesn't benefit you directly. That's
Mm-hmm.
just that. It's just a relationship. It's a conversation. It's not a, what is this guy going to be able to do for me? It's, this guy's interesting and I should just keep him within my wheelhouse, if no, for no other reason, to mentor or to help them along the way. And it should come back from a karma standpoint. So then to go from that, then you end up there and you meet him and you have this conversation. Again, there must have been this moment that ticked into your head where you were like, these guys are onto something. And not only that, he didn't call it an agency. You said he called it a communication company. That's
Yeah.
a big differentiator.
Well, Gary always speaks to what it is that he wants to be in the future. He doesn't talk to the present at all. He speaks to being the owner of the Jets. You know,
Yeah.
that could be 20 years from now, but he's
He
talking.
holds on to it.
That's it. But two things just to comment back on that because it's something I believe passionately. Um, it's moving beyond introduction and into expectation. People talk about networking, shaking a hand, meeting somebody. I could have just left it at there. The Seton Hall won the game, and I could have never saw that kid again. I was the one that said, "Hey, I'm the chief operating. Do you want to see what it's like when you get big?" And he said, "Yeah, I do." And he took me up on it. Now, funny part is he reminds me today, like, "James, you know who that was that I brought with me, right?" And I said, "No." He goes, "That guy's Travis, who was the CEO of Uber."
Really?
That's who two kids came down to sit in the big glass conference room down on Hudson Street, and that's what they saw. So And then he would always ask me, do you know somebody who does this? How would you do this? Have you ever done that? And I would just take his call, never with an expectation on the other end. See, that's the important thing too. You can't have the expectation, because then you're disappointed when it doesn't come to pass. If you have no expectation, when the call comes,
Anything is gravy.
So, yeah, Gary was a visionary, and we talked about the fact that in order to be 500 million, he told me, I want a Richard Edelman model, is what he said to me. And I said, I know Richard Edelman. I had breakfast with him yesterday. I know that model. I said, but he's much more than a public relations company. You know him as a PR guy. I said, but if you peel back the onion of that company, there's advertising in there, there's special events in there, there's digital marketing in there, there's a lot of stuff. So you got to be than just a social media advertising company. And that's when he pivoted the company to become a digital agency with social at its core. We created a holding company that then allowed him to make his first big acquisition of a digital publisher called PureWow, which now trades as the Gallery Media Group. We built a video production studio.
Did those acquisitions, did you feel like those allowed him just to get to market faster because you're buying an existing infrastructure that has at least some opportunity to be able to take talent?
Yeah, he tried to grow it on his own. He had a small publishing division, but it was taking long. He knew what he wanted to do. Then there were companies like Refinery 29, Vice, Vox that he had his eye on. I'm like, look, we could acquire something and you're automatically in the game. We could stay here 10 years and try and build it, but let me show you what an acquisition looks like. So that was the first acquisition.
Can we stay on that for just a second? Again, just thinking as a marketer. And so if you're a CMO that's out there and you're trying to navigate through this and you're trying to figure out, again, your agency relationships that are out there, whether it's a communications company or a PR group or a traditional agency, that landscape continues to change because you can't just have one group anymore, or you need to make sure that group is very diversified where again, perhaps some of those acquisitions have allowed Vayner to I don't want to say pivot to some extent, but to be able to open the tent maybe a little bit wider to marketers that maybe said, I already have somebody that I like for this, but what else do you do? Do you feel like that's really what allowed you guys to pour some gas on it at the time?
Yeah, well, remember, he was clear on what he wanted to do. I want to be an international. I said, okay, great. Let's, don't do it the way I did. You don't need to be 31 offices in 26 countries. I said, they're still trying to close shit that I opened in the early 90s. I said, you can touch the world from a couple spots. Let's pick one in Europe. Let's pick one in Asia. And he picked London and Singapore.
Let's talk, if we can, for the last handful of minutes here, a little bit about the Sasha Group itself. So talk to us about what that is. Is it a spin-off of Vayner? Is it part underneath Vayner? And is that where you're spending the majority of your time these days?
Yeah. So fast forward, I was with him 5 years. We took the company from 42 million to 150 million, from 400 people to a little over 800 people. We did put the international footprint in London and Singapore. We started a 40,000 square foot video production studio in Long Island City. We acquired the Gallery Media Group.
You built it.
And then he came to me and said, hey, you ready to start something new? And I said, yeah, what do you have in mind? He goes, look, I got 10 million followers. I'm on the cover of Entrepreneur Magazine. We built a company to service Fortune 500. I don't have anything for smaller, mid-sized businesses. All these people want to work with me. Here's a $3 million pizzeria. Wants to be the next wine library at $60 million. How do I get there? So, any good COO kind of puts themselves out of a job, because you hire all the people around you and do what you need to do. And I said, yeah. What do you have in mind? He goes, I want to start a new company. I want to name it after my father for legacy purposes, so don't screw it up. And, what do you need? And I said, well, let's look, it's not going to be a mini Vayner. It's not for trinkets and trash, meaning if Vayner flushes the toilet, it doesn't show up at the Sasha Group. And I want to run it like a consultancy on the front end and an advertising agency on the back end. And he said, what do you mean? I said, look, I want to cherry pick all the stuff that did work at KPMG, at Goldman Sachs, at Interbrand. They all run like consultancies, and then marry it with the good stuff that worked at MS&L and Saatchi and Cito and Vayner, and I think we could have a real win-win here. So we service consulting, education, and digital marketing for companies up to 200 million. So your friend Matt Brown and Thumbstock, is part of our consulting offering, which is something called the mentors, where we actually take a piece of the upside of the business if we help them to be successful beyond their wildest dreams. It's about explosive growth, not just about growth.
First of all, thank you again very much for the time. James Orsini, president of the Sasha Group. It's an opportunity for you to take a lot of your knowledge and allow those that are ready for it, that similar kind of growth that Gary went through, and provide them a resource for that, because there really isn't, hadn't been much of that out there. Before the Sasha Group, I'm not familiar with somebody who does that exactly. Obviously, there's tons of consultants and business consultants, but not to that same extent, and not to the extent that what you guys are doing out there. So let's, if you don't mind, with this last question, let's talk about what's next, not just for the Sasha Group, but let's talk about what's next in general for this whole industry, because COVID has certainly, put everybody on their heels to try to figure out how do you operate when everything is closed. And then you add obviously what's happening out there with Black Lives Matter and the very real and honest and open conversation that needs to take place with race, that for many of us who look like I do, to be honest with you, who felt like, well, that probably isn't really happening that much. Clearly it was. And the time is probably now. And again, maybe it took all of these things, everybody being stuck at home, everybody being wrapped into social media, everybody finally just building up this sense of we want something different, maybe to change all of this. So where do you feel like that change will really take place? And with the last few minutes, where do you feel like the Sasha Group will play a role in helping those clients of yours and new clients to navigate that?
So the Sasha Group doesn't ask its clients to do anything it wouldn't do for itself, right? So that's our secret sauce. We don't say, hey, try this, let's see if it works. Okay. That might have been what I did in big advertising. I got a big idea. Let's throw it out there and see if it works. Okay. We do a lot of testing, learning, optimizing, right? So we have actions. 3 of our last 5 hires at the Sasha Group in the last 60 days were people of color. That's an action. The other 2 were female. That's an action as we try to diversify our employee base. We launched a new educational product. We tried to make it affordable. We gave it away free for the first 6 weeks during COVID. And now if you sign up for stork.thesashagroup.com, it is a weekly subscription, 5-minute tactical how-to videos in the social media marketing space. You get it for $150 a year, so it's very affordable. Gets you into hallways of the VaynerX world, which is where the Sasha Group resides, right? Because you asked me, is it part of VaynerMedia? No, it's under the VaynerX umbrella. It's its own separate company. It operates separately from. But the unique thing about what we bring is entrepreneurial DNA infused with Fortune 500 experience. So I brought the people over from Sasha, from Vayner. So these are Vayner people who are now in the Sasha Group.
Well, and it's embedded in the culture now to some extent.
It's embedded into the culture.
Change and evolve.
Yeah, exactly. So if you go to our website, thesashagroup.com, you'll see 3 or 4 new products that we launched in and around COVID-19, especially for that, virtual whiteboard sessions, mixtape creatives to refresh your content because you can't do a live action production now that everything's shut down and quarantined. Well, send us 10 pieces of content, give us 10 days, give us 10 grand, and we'll remix it so it looks fresh and new.
It's definitely a chance to move forward. Well, listen, James Orsini, president at the Sasha Group, appreciate making some time for me from Jersey. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. I hope once the city allows us all back into the city safely and we can travel a little bit more, I hope we'll get a chance to catch up in person as well. And I'll make Matt pay for lunch.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of the CMO Suite.
Thanks for hanging out in the CMO Suite, the podcast for marketers who want to be in the know, presented by Connectivity Holdings.
You're a C-level manager. You shouldn't have to know the difference between behavioral or contextual targeting, but your agency should. Uconnect provides brands and biddable teams direct access to platforms like The Trade Desk, Google, Amazon, Facebook, OTT, and more. Their U.S.-based traders can train your in-house team or provide complete transparency with no minimums and CPM-based service pricing for true transparency. Something Mighty Hive, The Trade Desk, and Centro simply don't offer. Tired of being the smartest one in the room? Reach out to Uconnect today for a free demo. Uconnect, the world's leader in true transparent biddable media.
This episode of the CMO Suite is also brought to you by Winmo. Winmo is the most comprehensive and widely used advertising database, providing an unfair advantage to media and marketing professionals nationwide. CMO Suite listeners receive complimentary trials of Winmo just by visiting winmo.com/CMO Suite.